Welcome to Second Take, the show that takes a look at the issues behind the news. The Necsa board has been in quorate for weeks following 5 resignations. Terence Creamer joins me to discuss the governance crisis and what's being done about it. Hi, Terence.
Hi, Chanel.
The governance meltdown seems to be down to a dispute over executive salaries.
Yes, it has come down to that. Basically, there was a pay progression that was approved, sort of consulted by outside consultants. But when it came to actually implementation, which was down to the CEO, questions were raised by the board, especially questions around whether there was the liquidity to do this. And presentations were made by the CFO and the CEO. And those were not, from the board's perspective, satisfactorily answered. And so there was a move to suspend Louisa Tayabashe, and that went legal. So there was an opposition to that by the CEO. And in that process, there was court papers and there were resignations that were also by the existing board chairperson, David Nichols, who was in favour of and supporter of the CEO, and said he wasn't going to sign this order. The minister also objected because they said, this is my sort of domain, I appoint the CEO, and he didn't feel the board had given him any wriggle room, and he sought a meeting. And in that process, the court case was withdrawn by the CEO, but 5 board members resigned, and that left the board in quorate, so it can't meet. And in the process, we've sort of got a governance meltdown at a very important state-owned company that seemed to be coming right and seemed to be sort of steadying the ship. And that's been the process for many state-owned companies over the last few years that have been sort of wobbling. And we now have a situation where this authority has been delegated to the CEO to sort of do the governance until a new board is appointed.
It seems the minister has confidence in the executive team.
Yes, I think, there was a late night session with the Parliamentary Portfolio Committee this week. Went on until after 10:30 at night, started at 8:30. And it was sort of seen as an emergency, what is going on? Parliamentarians wanted to understand what is going on. And I think the minister made it clear that he is on the side of the executives, that he feels they're doing a good job, that the organisation financially and operationally is starting to turn the corner. He claims financially that when the results are presented to Parliament in the coming weeks, that will be borne out, and that there's also that the Auditor General of South Africa will be giving Necsa a clean audit. So there's a feeling, from the way he responded, that he's in support of this executive team. There was also a feeling that he was quite irritated by the board members that had resigned. But, there have been a lot of reports, and that's why it is, for this public, it's very difficult to interpret, because some of the reports have been quite concerning. Was the board misled by the CEO and the CFO in saying that there was liquidity for this salary increase? Was the pay progression, was it implemented properly? And that really wasn't ventilated at all in this discussion, from what I could see. There was also a whistleblower, an anonymous letter that came through to the minister, saying that the relationship between the CEO and the chairperson is all too close and too cozy, and that they travel together overseas. So there's a lot of sort of murkiness around this, which is not very helpful. This is a national key point. It's a nuclear reactor. It might be a research reactor, but it's an important nuclear facility that produces medical isotopes for the world. And there's big plans, to put in a new reactor to replace this aged research reactor. And they also, Necsa, see themselves as playing a role in the unfolding nuclear renaissance, as some call it, and playing a role in some way in that. But with these governance issues do raise a lot of questions.
Minister Ramokgopa has decided to replace the entire Necsa board instead of just filling the vacant seats.
Yes, I suppose the timing was pretty good in some ways of this crisis, in the sense that there's a number of boards under the DEE, under the Department of Electricity and Energy, whose terms are coming to the expiry date. So they've been sort of testing the market for individuals to sort of take over, to come into the to different boards, and one of them was Necsa, which the new board is supposed to come into place in January next year. So they've able, because that process has started, they're able to somewhat accelerate that process. So instead of January, they're now talking about the next 3 weeks, replacing the full board. So they're not looking at just replacing the 5 individuals, making the board, whole again. They're looking at actually a whole new board, but probably with some legacy members to keep the institutional memory intact. So again, the minister didn't hide his irritation, saying that maybe this board didn't have the scientific nuclear engineering type capabilities that it should have had, and therefore got fixated on the financial and the salary. That I think that wasn't a great message. But on the other hand, he's saying he wants to bring in more scientists and more engineers into the board so that they can take a more strategic view. So the procedure from here is that it needs to be cabinet approved. So there's cabinet committees meet. So the cabinet meets every second Wednesday, and in between cabinet committees meet. But because we have a public holiday next week, it's all been pushed back by a week. So in 2 weeks' time, the committee will meet, and in 3 weeks' time, the cabinet will meet. And usually at the bottom of every cabinet statement, you'll have a series of appointments subject to them being vetted, etc., and their credentials being approved. So that's what I think we should expect in the next 3 weeks, that there will be a cabinet statement that includes the name of the whole new board, and it'll be a whole new board, possibly with a couple of legacy members.
This comes amid problems at other institutions overseen by the minister, notably Necsa.
Yeah, so this was a late night emergency portfolio committee meeting. There was another one meant to be held last week on Necsa, but it actually happened during the day. But again, it came out of the blue, a settlement agreement of 54 billion that's going to mean much higher tariffs for electricity consumers for the next 2 years and beyond. And it's part of a pattern, unfortunately, at Necsa, that every time Eskom gets the records of decision for different rulings, they tend to take these on review because they can see obvious mistakes. Now, Necsa claims that they saw this mistake, and it's so material. I mean, in Eskom's reading, it's 107 billion rand. In the settlement, it's 54 billion rand. It's so material, you kind of wonder how one official, they say senior official, but sort of junior from the regulatory members, can be the person that the consequence management is centered on at the moment. And that's where it is centered. It feels like it needed to be higher than that, because it would have had a material impact on the tariff increase. I mean, I've heard a figure that instead of 12.74%, it would have been closer to 23%. So you kind of think, how do you miss such a big error? So, but it does show that state-owned enterprises that have been a real drag on this economy and a real drag on confidence and the confidence of citizens in state capacity and in these boards continues to be an issue. And we thought that was sort of dissipating. And in many ways, at the large state-owned enterprises, Eskom's in a much better position. It feels, okay, there's pushback on reform and things that are worrying people. Transnet seems to be a much better position. But there's still these issues that keep coming up. And I think in the energy space, really, there needs to be a lot of focus on getting capability and capacity at Necsa, which is a real pivot for this energy transition. And we really need the best skills possible in place there.
Thank you. That's the Second Take show for this week. Thank you for watching, and join us again next time for more news analysis.